A martial arts champion mocked a janitor and hurt her dog until the Navy SEAL intervened. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if you want to support the channel, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. They made one fatal mistake. They hurt someone who couldn't fight back. They kicked a small dog because they enjoyed cruelty. They mocked a woman who cleaned their floors because they believed power meant immunity. What they didn't know was that a man trained to eliminate threats was watching. A man whose German Shepherd partner recognized injustice the moment it appeared. A man who had spent 12 years learning that true strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Iron Peak, Montana wore winter like a second skin. January had buried the small mountain town under 3 feet of snow, transforming the Rocky Mountain foothills into a landscape of white silence, broken only by wind that cut through layers of clothing like cold steel. The town existed in that fragile space between civilization and wilderness, where a single main street held together a community of 3,000 souls who understood that survival meant watching out for each other. At least, that's what it used to mean. The cold here was different from the desert heat Lieutenant Marcus Donovan had known for too many years. It bit exposed skin, turned breath to fog, made every movement deliberate. He appreciated that. Deliberate was survivable. Chaos killed. He'd learned that lesson 8 months ago when an IED had turned a routine patrol into a funeral for 2 men who'd trusted him to bring them home. Mark stood 6'2", his frame carrying 205 pounds of lean muscle earned through necessity rather than vanity. Close-cropped dark hair showed premature gray at the temples, the kind that came from stress rather than age. At 34, he moved with an economy of motion that spoke of military training so ingrained it had become involuntary. His gray eyes held a permanent watchfulness that never quite faded, even in sleep. Scars marked his forearms like a roadmap of decisions made in fractions of seconds where hesitation meant death. The cabin he'd rented sat 3 miles outside town, isolated by design. Pine trees pressed close on 3 sides, their branches heavy with snow that muffled sound until the world felt wrapped in cotton. He'd chosen it specifically for the silence. The VA psychiatrist had used words like decompress and process trauma and mandatory leave. Mark just wanted to forget. But forgetting required quiet, and lately, quiet only amplified the memories. Titan didn't let him dwell. The German Shepherd sat by the cabin door, 95 pounds of muscle and loyalty, his traditional black and tan coat thick against the mountain cold. At 5 years old, the dog was in his prime, every inch a weapon refined through military training. But calling Titan a weapon missed the point. He was a partner. The kind forged not through commands but through shared survival. The shrapnel scar on Titan's left shoulder matched the ones on Mark's arms. Same IED. Same moment when the world had turned to fire and noise and the wet sound of bodies breaking. Titan had been 20 feet away, clearing a building. The blast had thrown them both. Mark had crawled to the dog first, before checking his own injuries, before calling for medic. He'd needed to know Titan was breathing. Everything else could wait. Now they shared rituals born from trauma. Titan refused to eat until Mark took the first bite. Mark couldn't sleep until he'd checked every lock twice. They understood each other in ways that transcended language. When Titan's ears swiveled toward a sound, Mark's hand moved to his hip where a sidearm used to rest. When Mark's breathing quickened during nightmares, Titan's weight pressed against his chest until the panic subsided. Their routine had settled into comfortable predictability over the 3 weeks since arriving in Iron Peak. Morning runs through snow-packed trails where their breath formed clouds in air so cold it hurt to inhale. Afternoons splitting firewood, with an axe that made his shoulders burn in ways that felt cleaner than combat. Evenings sitting in silence while wind howled outside and a fire crackled inside, 2 survivors waiting for wounds to scar over. But even isolation required supplies. The town pulled them in once a week, a necessary concession to civilization. Mark drove his battered pickup truck down the mountain road with Titan in the passenger seat. The dog's attention fixed out the window with professional intensity, cataloging every movement, every potential threat. Old habits didn't die. They just found new applications. Iron Peak's main street stretched for 8 blocks, lined with businesses that served function over fashion. A hardware store with Christmas lights still hanging in late January. A general store with ads for snowmobile parts. A diner called The Hungry Bear that advertised breakfast all day. The buildings were old but maintained, the kind of town where people fixed things instead of replacing them, because replacing meant money most folks didn't have. Mark parked in front of the diner. 11 in the morning meant the breakfast crowd had cleared and lunch hadn't started. He preferred it that way. Fewer people, fewer eyes, fewer questions about the scars or the dog or why a man his age wasn't working. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and bacon grease, and something baking that reminded him of a childhood he rarely thought about anymore. Vinyl booths lined the windows. A counter with red stools ran along one wall. Country music played low from speakers that crackled with age. 3 customers scattered across the space, each focused on their food with the intensity of people who'd worked since dawn. Mark took a corner booth with clear sightlines to both exits. Titan settled at his feet, invisible to anyone not looking for him. The dog's training meant he could disappear in plain sight, becoming part of the furniture until needed. The waitress who approached moved with efficiency born from years of practice. Her name tag read Claire. She was somewhere in her 50s, with tired eyes that I'd still managed kindness. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please, black. You want a menu, or you know what you want? Burger, medium, whatever vegetables you've got on the side." She wrote it down, glanced under the table, spotted Titan. Her expression didn't change. "He's beautiful. Military?" "Yes, ma'am." "Got so. My brother was Army. He had a dog too. They understand things, don't they?" Mark nodded. Words felt unnecessary. Claire smiled. The kind that acknowledged shared understanding without requiring elaboration. "I'll get that burger started." She walked away, and Mark let his attention drift across the diner, cataloging details without conscious thought. The couple in the far booth, working on a laptop together, voices low, probably planning something. The old man at the counter, nursing coffee and reading a newspaper, his hands shaking slightly, likely Parkinson's. The woman in the booth by the kitchen door, wearing a heavy coat despite the diner's warmth, her hands wrapped around a mug, like she was trying to absorb its heat. It was the woman who held his attention longest. Not because she was threatening, but because everything about her posture screamed exhaustion mixed with determination. She was small, maybe 5'3", with weathered hands and dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Mid to late 50s, he guessed. Her coat had been mended in places, careful stitches that spoke of necessity rather than fashion. She stared at her coffee with the intensity of someone trying to solve an impossible problem. Titan's ears swiveled toward her. Not alarm, but interest. The dog's body language shifted subtly, the way it did when he detected something worth noting. Mark watched the woman take a sip of coffee, her hands trembling slightly, not from cold, from something else. Fear, maybe. Or anger held so tight it leaked out through small movements. Claire returned with Mark's coffee. He wrapped his hands around the mug, letting heat seep into his palms, and tried to remind himself that other people's problems weren't his responsibility. He'd come here to heal, not to fix broken things. He'd tried fixing things for 12 years, and all it had earned him was a discharge order and mandatory therapy. The woman in the coat stood, left money on the table, and walked toward the exit. As she passed, Mark caught a glimpse of bruising on her wrist, the kind that came from someone grabbing too hard. She pulled her sleeve down quickly, but not quickly enough. Titan watched her go, his gaze tracking her movement through the window as she climbed into an old sedan and drove away. "That's Maria," Claire said quietly, refilling Mark's coffee without being asked. "She's good people, works hard, too hard, probably." Mark didn't respond, didn't ask. Asking meant involvement. But Titan kept watching the road where the sedan had disappeared, and some instinct Mark had learned to trust whispered that their quiet isolation was about to end. Maria Santos had lived in Iron Peak for 30 years, long enough to watch the town change from a place where neighbors knew each other's names to something harder, colder. Not the weather, the people. Or rather, the new people who'd arrived with money and expectations, that didn't include respect for those who'd built their lives here through labor instead of investment portfolios. She'd come to America at 28, legal immigration papers earned through patience and proper channels, carrying dreams and determination in equal measure. Her husband Roberto had found work in the mines, dangerous labor that paid enough to build a life. They'd raised 2 children in a small house on the east side of town, the side where working people lived. Both kids were in college now, scholarships earned through grades that reflected their mother's insistence that education meant freedom. Roberto had died 5 years ago when a support beam failed in a tunnel that should have been reinforced months earlier. The company paid minimum settlement and moved on. Maria hadn't. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep her children's dreams alive, cleaning offices during the day and the Iron Peak Martial Arts Academy at night. The academy paid better, almost suspiciously better, but Maria needed every dollar and didn't ask questions about why a martial arts school needed a janitor 6 nights a week. Until 3 nights ago, when questions became unavoidable. She'd been cleaning the administrative offices, the part of the academy guests never saw. The building was supposed to be empty after 9. Just Maria and her mop bucket and the industrial vacuum that whined like a dying animal. She'd learned to appreciate the solitude. Cleaning let her mind wander to her daughter's last phone call about medical school applications, her son's excitement about engineering internships, futures built on her aching knees and chemical-burned hands. The voices had stopped her outside Derek Voss's private office. Male voices, low and urgent. She'd frozen, mop in hand, instinct screaming that she was hearing something dangerous. The shipments come through the academy accounts. Voss's voice, unmistakable even through the heavy door. Cash gets logged as membership fees, equipment purchases. It's clean by the time it hits the main accounts. And if someone looks too close? Another voice, unfamiliar, with an accent she couldn't place. Nobody looks. I own half this town. The sheriff's in my pocket. Anyone who works here knows what happens when they talk. Maria had moved then, quickly, pushing her cart toward the bathrooms like she'd heard nothing. But her hands shook, and the mop handle clattered against the bucket, loud enough that the voices stalked. Footsteps approached the door. She'd kept walking, heart hammering, praying they'd assumed the noise was just the janitor being clumsy. The door opened behind her. Maria. She turned. Voss stood in the hallway. 6 feet of sculpted muscle in an expensive suit, his shaved head catching light from the overhead fixtures. Tribal tattoos snaked up his neck. Remnants of a fighting career he never let anyone forget. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Working late, he'd said. Not a question. Yes, sir. Always do. These offices, you clean. He end them every night? Yes, sir. Just like always. He'd studied her for a long moment, those cold eyes calculating. You're a good worker, Maria. Reliable. I appreciate that. But you know, we're making some changes. Might need to adjust the cleaning schedule. Maybe fewer nights. Fewer nights meant less money. Money her son needed for textbooks next semester. I can work whatever schedule you need, Mr. Voss. Of course you can. He'd stepped closer, and Maria had smelled expensive cologne mixed with something darker. Threat. You know what I appreciate most about you, Maria? You mind your business. You come in, do your work, go home. Never any gossip, never any problems. That's valuable. I'd hate to lose that. The message was clear. She'd nodded, mumbled something about finishing the bathrooms, and retreated. Behind her, she'd heard the office door close and the voices resume, quieter now. The next night, her schedule had been changed. Instead of 6 nights a week, she was down to 4. Instead of finishing at midnight, she now worked until 2 in the morning, alone in a building, miles from town with unreliable cell service. The pay stayed the same despite fewer hours, which made no sense until she understood it wasn't about money. It was about control. The night after that, she'd been carrying garbage to the dumpster behind the building when a piece of equipment, a heavy speed bag on a chain mount, had dropped from the ceiling directly where she'd been standing seconds before. Only luck had saved her. She bent to tie her shoe, and the bag had crashed into concrete instead of her skull. Vic Rourke, Voss's head of security, had appeared within minutes. 6'4" of former military police, with a dishonorable discharge she'd heard whispered about, but never confirmed. His expression had shown no concern. Faulty installation, he'd said, staring at the bag like it was an interesting puzzle. Lucky you moved. Yes, Maria had whispered. Lucky. Tonight, the message had become explicit. She'd been leaving through the back entrance, exhausted and wanting only to get home to Pepper, her small terrier mix who slept on her bed and made the empty house feel less empty. The parking lot was dark, the single overhead light conveniently burned out. 3 men had stepped from the shadows. Vic Rourke, flanked by the Lee brothers, Tanner and Brett, assistant instructors who smiled too much and hurt people for sport during sparring sessions. Maria. Vic's voice carried across the cold air. We need to talk. She kept walking toward her car, keys clutched in her fist, the way the self-defense article said, like that would matter against 3 trained fighters. They'd surrounded her before she'd made it 10 feet. Not touching, but close enough that their size became a cage. Mr. Voss is concerned, Vic had said. He thinks maybe you're not happy here. Maybe you're thinking about talking to people. People who might misunderstand private conversations. I don't know what you mean. Her voice had sounded small, even to herself. Tanner Lee had smiled. Your daughter. She's at University of Montana, right? Pre-med? That's expensive. Dangerous too. College campuses. Lots of things can happen to young women alone. Ice had flooded Maria's veins. Not fear for herself, fear for her children. And your son, Brett had added, engineering student. He walks home from the library late at night. Dark streets, you never know. Please. The word had escaped before she could stop it. I haven't said anything to anyone. I won't. I just need this job. Here's what you need. Vic had stepped closer, his breath fogging in the cold air. You need to remember you're nobody. You clean floors. You're invisible. And invisible people don't have opinions about what they see or hear. Understand? She'd nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. Good. Now go home. Think about whether this job is worth the trouble. They'd let her pass, and she'd climbed into her car with shaking hands, started the engine, and driven away. In her rearview mirror, she'd watched them laugh about something, casual, as if they'd just discussed weather instead of threatening her children. She'd made it half a mile before pulling over to vomit in the snow. At home, Pepper had greeted her with desperate excitement, the way small dogs do when their people return. Maria had held the animal and cried until no tears remained, then pulled herself together because falling apart was a luxury she couldn't afford. The next morning, she'd gone to the diner, spent money she shouldn't spare on coffee she couldn't taste, and tried to figure out what to do. Going to the sheriff meant going to someone on Voss's payroll. Leaving town meant abandoning the only home her children had known, destroying their college plans, admitting defeat. Staying meant living in fear and hoping compliance would be enough. She'd noticed the man in the corner booth. Military bearing, watchful eyes. A presence that made her instincts whisper danger and safety simultaneously. His dog, beautiful and alert, had watched her with intelligent eyes. For a moment, she'd wondered what it would be like to have that kind of protection. Then reality reasserted itself. Men like that didn't help women like her. They had their own battles. Maria had left the diner and driven to work, the day job cleaning offices downtown, and tried to pretend everything was fine. But the bruise on her wrist from Vic's grab the previous night throbbed with every movement, a reminder that some problems don't disappear through wishful thinking. Tonight, she'd return to the academy for another shift. She'd clean the floors and empty the trash and mind her business, because her children's safety mattered more than justice. She'd learned long ago that the world wasn't fair. Good people suffered while bad people prospered. Complaining changed nothing. Survival meant accepting reality. But deep down, in a place she rarely acknowledged, Maria Santos was tired of accepting, tired of bowing, tired of being afraid. She just didn't know what else to do. Mark spent the afternoon splitting wood behind his cabin, the axe rising and falling in rhythm that emptied his mind of everything except the bite of cold air and burn in his shoulders. Titan patrolled the perimeter, tracking scents and investigating shadows with professional thoroughness. By the time darkness fell, Mark's hands ached, and a cord of firewood stood stacked against the cabin wall, enough to last another week of isolation. He cooked dinner over the wood stove, nothing fancy, just venison from the general store and vegetables roasted in cast iron. Titan waited with perfect discipline until Mark took the first bite, their shared ritual, then ate from his bowl with the focus of a creature who understood food was fuel rather than pleasure. After dinner, Mark sat in the single chair by the window, watching snow fall through darkness, illuminated by moonlight reflecting off white landscape. His mind drifted to the woman from the diner, Maria, the bruise on her wrist, the exhaustion in her posture, the fear buried under determination. Not his problem, not his fight. He'd come here to heal, not to fix other people's troubles. The world was full of people suffering injustice. He couldn't save them all. Trying had nearly killed him. Titan's head lifted suddenly, ears swiveling toward the door. The dog's body went rigid, that particular stillness that meant threat detected. A low growl built in his chest, barely audible but unmistakable. Mark was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the Sig Sauer P226 on the table beside his chair. He moved to the window, staying back from the glass, scanning the tree line. Nothing visible. But Titan didn't false alarm. "What is it, boy?" Mark kept his voice low and calm. Titan moved to the door, nose working the gap underneath, processing information Mark's human senses couldn't detect. The growl deepened. Not the warning for wildlife. This was the sound Titan made for human threats. Mark checked his watch. 9:43 at night. No reason for anyone to be out here. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles away. The road to his cabin didn't lead anywhere else. He pulled on his coat, grabbed a tactical flashlight, and gave Titan the hand signal for heel. The dog pressed against his left leg, waiting for instruction. Mark opened the door slowly, flashlight and pistol moving in tandem, clearing angles with muscle memory from 1,000 entries in places where mistakes meant body bags. The cold hit like a physical force. Snow had stopped falling, leaving the world in crystalline silence. Mark's breath fogged, Titan's attention fixed on the driveway, every muscle coiled. Mark moved down the porch steps, boots crunching through snow, sweeping his light across the clearing. The beam caught tire tracks, recent, the edges still sharp. Someone had driven up here within the last hour. The tracks led toward the cabin, then circled back toward the road. Titan pulled forward, straining against Mark's command to heel. The dog wanted to pursue, every instinct screaming to chase down the threat. Mark held him back, following the tracks visually. They stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, where someone had sat idling, watching. Not hunters, not lost tourists. Someone had come here deliberately, looked at his cabin, and left. Reconnaissance. Mark's jaw tightened. He'd been in country too long to mistake surveillance for coincidence. Someone was gathering information. The question was why. He secured the perimeter, checking for signs of tampering, finding nothing except the tracks. Back inside, he locked the door and considered his options. Could be nothing. Could be local teenagers messing around. Could be someone who'd taken wrong turn and gotten curious about the hermit in the woods. Or it could be connected to the woman with the bruise. Mark tried to dismiss the thought. Paranoia was a symptom he was supposed to be managing. Not everything was a threat. Not every mystery required investigation. But Titan paced the cabin, restless and alert, and Mark's instincts whispered that quiet was about to shatter. He forced himself to sleep, or tried to. The nightmares came as they always did. Fire and smoke and screaming. The IED blast replaying in fractured images. His teammates' faces. The moment he'd realized they weren't getting up. The helplessness of watching life drain from wounds he couldn't treat fast enough. Titan's weight on his chest pulled him back. Mark woke gasping, the dog's brown eyes inches from his face, steady and grounding. He wrapped his arms around the animal, feeling Titan's heartbeat against his own, using the rhythm to slow his breathing. 3:17 in the morning. Too early to rise. Too late to fall back asleep properly. Mark lay in darkness, listening to wind and the settling sounds of the cabin, and tried not to think about tire tracks or bruised wrists or the way evil flourished when good people looked away. At dawn, he gave up on rest. He fed Titan, made coffee, and decided a run would clear his head. They followed their usual route through the forest, 5 miles of trail Mark had memorized. Titan ranged ahead, investigating scents, occasionally circling back to check on Mark before continuing forward. 2 miles in, Titan stopped dead. His hackles rose, body going rigid in that particular way that meant something wrong ahead. Mark slowed, scanning the trail. Nothing visible, but Titan didn't false alarm. "Show me," Mark commanded. Titan moved forward, off the main trail, picking his way through deeper snow. Mark followed, hand resting on the knife at his belt. They traveled 50 yards through pine trees before Titan stopped again, whining softly. Mark saw it then. Tracks in the snow, but not animal. These were shuffling, irregular, the pattern of someone moving while injured, and beside the tracks, dark spots that could only be blood, already frozen. Titan followed the trail, and Mark's chest tightened as he realized where it led, toward the road that connected to town, toward civilization. Someone had been out here, hurt, trying to get somewhere. The trail ended at a small clearing where the blood increased. Signs of a struggle, snow disturbed in a wide area, more blood, and in the center, a small form partially covered by fresh snowfall. Mark ran forward, dropping to his knees. A dog, small, maybe 18 pounds, terrier mix. It's tan. Tan and white fur was matted with blood from a wound on its side. The animal's breathing was shallow, rapid, its eyes closed. Hypothermia and blood loss. Without treatment, it would be dead within the hour. But it wore a collar. Someone's pet. Someone who would be looking for it. Mark stripped off his jacket, wrapped the small dog carefully, and stood. Titan. Track. Find. Titan's nose went to the snow, processing scent trails. He moved with purpose. Following a path Mark couldn't see, they traveled another 100 yards before Titan stopped at the base of a steep embankment leading down to a ravine. At the bottom, partially hidden by snow and shadow, Mark saw a dark shape. He descended carefully, boots sliding on ice, and found a woman lying motionless. Small frame, dark hair. Heavy coat he recognized from the diner. Maria. She was unconscious, her face pale, a gash on her forehead bleeding sluggishly. Her right arm bent at an angle that screamed broken bone. She'd fallen or been pushed, tumbled down the embankment, and lay here long enough that snow had begun covering her. Mark checked her pulse, weak but present, her breathing shallow, core temperature dropping. She wouldn't survive another hour exposed. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had hurt this woman and her dog, then left them to die in the wilderness. Mark made a decision in the space between heartbeats. He secured the small dog inside his jacket, then carefully lifted Maria. She was light, too light, her body limp in his arms. He climbed the embankment with practiced efficiency, muscles screaming, refusing to let either victim slip. Titan led them back to the cabin, moving fast, but checking back frequently, understanding the urgency. By the time they reached the clearing, Mark's arms burned and Maria's breathing had grown more labored. Inside, he laid her on his bed. Assessed injuries with hands trained in combat medicine. Broken arm, definitely. Possible concussion, hypothermia, contusions and lacerations, but alive, still alive. The dog he placed near the wood stove, wrapped in blankets, checking its wound. Deep but clean, probably from a kick. Ribs possibly broken. The animal's eyes opened briefly, brown and terrified, before closing again. Mark worked methodically, started a fire to raise the cabin temperature, treated Maria's head wound, stabilized her arm with supplies from his medical kit, removed her wet clothing, replaced it with dry thermal layers, covered her with every blanket he owned. Her core temperature was 89 degrees. Dangerous, but survivable if he acted fast. He treated the dog's wound, bandaged it, got water into the animal using a dropper. Small victories. Keep them warm, keep them breathing. Everything else could wait. By noon, Maria's temperature had risen to 94 degrees. Color returned to her face. Her breathing steadied. The dog slept fitfully, but its pulse strengthened. Mark sat in his chair, watching them both, and felt fury build in his chest. Cold, controlled fury that his instructors had taught him to weaponize. Someone had done this. Someone had hurt a woman and her dog and left them to freeze to death. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was attempted murder. At 2 in the afternoon, Maria's eyes opened. Confusion first. Then fear as she registered unfamiliar surroundings. She tried to sit up, gasped at the pain in her arm. Easy, Mark said quietly. You're safe. You fell. I found you. Her eyes found him, then swept the cabin, landing on Pepper near the stove. My dog. Alive, hurt but alive. I treated the wound. She'll need a vet, but she'll survive. Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks. They kicked her. I tried to stop them, but they kicked her. And she ran, and I tried to follow, but they pushed me. And I fell, and her voice broke. Mark moved closer, his voice steady. Who did this? Voss's men. Vic and the Lee brothers. They came to my house. Said I was a problem. Said I needed to leave town or my children would have accidents. She was shaking now, shock setting in despite the warmth. I told them I'd leave. I swear I told them, but they laughed and said it was too late. Then Brett kicked Pepper, and she ran outside, and I chased her, and they followed. And Vic pushed me down the hill, and they just left us there. Her breathing accelerated, panic rising. Mike placed a hand on her shoulder, firm and grounding. Listen to me, Maria. You're safe now. They can't reach you here. I need you to breathe slowly. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Can you do that? She nodded, following his instructions, her breathing gradually slowing. Good. Now I need you to tell me everything. Who is Voss? What did you see? Over the next hour, Maria told him. The voices she'd overheard, the money laundering, the threats, the escalating intimidation, the corruption that ran through town like rot through wood. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop until he knew everything. When she finished, Mark sat back, his expression unreadable. Maria watched him, this stranger who'd saved her life, and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not anger, something colder. Something that made her simultaneously grateful she was under his protection and terrified for anyone who wasn't. My children, she whispered. They threatened my children. If something happens to me, if Voss knows I told you, nothing will happen to your children, Mark said, and his voice carried absolute certainty. Nothing will happen to you, not anymore. You don't understand. Voss owns this town. The sheriff works for him. He has money, power. People who'll do anything he says. Mark leaned forward, and Maria saw something in his expression that reminded her of winter storms. Beautiful, inevitable, and completely unstoppable. They picked the wrong person to terrorize, he said quietly, and they made one critical mistake. What mistake? They left you alive. He stood, moved to the window, scanning the tree line with habitual vigilance, which means they don't know you're here, which gives us time. Time for what? Mark turned back to her, and Maria saw in his eyes the truth she'd suspected in the diner. This was a man trained for violence, built for protection, carrying skills most people only saw in movies. Time to end this, he said. All of it. Mark spent the rest of the afternoon fortifying the cabin, while Maria slept and Peppa recovered by the fire. He moved with methodical precision, checking sight lines from every window, identifying cover positions, clearing fields of fire. The cabin had been chosen for isolation, not defense, but he could work with what he had. He repositioned furniture to create barriers, moved supplies away from windows, established fallback positions. Titan watched with professional interest, understanding on some instinct level that their territory was being prepared for combat. The Dodd had seen this before, in places where preparation meant survival. Maria woke as darkness fell, groggy and disoriented. Mark helped her sit up, checked her pupils for concussion signs, satisfied himself that she was stable. He heated soup on the wood stove, made her eat despite her protests that she wasn't hungry. The body needed fuel to heal. She'd learn that, or he'd make her learn it. My children, she said between spoonfuls, I need to call them, warn them. Not yet. Phone calls can be traced. If Voss has the connections you described, he might be monitoring your family's communications. Fear flooded her face. Then they're in danger. They're safer than you think. Your daughter is at University of Montana. Your son at Montana Tech. Both are hours away, on campuses with security. Voss's reach is local. He's threatened them to control you, but actually moving against them would draw attention he can't afford. Federal attention. As long as you're missing, presumed dead, he has no reason to escalate. Presumes dead? You disappeared during a snowstorm after being attacked. Your car is presumably still at your house. No body found yet, but in this cold, that's expected. He thinks he solved his problem. Maria's hands shook. My babies will think I'm dead. For now, we'll fix that. But first we need to understand what we're facing. Mark pulled his laptop from his pack, the one concession to technology he'd allowed himself. Tell me about the Iron Peak Martial Arts Academy. How long has Voss owned it? 4 years. He bought the old resort on the mountain, converted it, spent millions on renovations. Where did the money come from? He says his MMA career, prize money, sponsorships. But I've heard rumors. Other businesses, real estate, things that didn't quite add up. Mark's fingers moved across the keyboard, searching. The cabin had satellite internet. Expensive but necessary for his VA appointments. He pulled up Derek Voss's professional fighting record first. Impressive. 32 fights, 28 wins. Only 4 losses. Brutal style. 3 opponents hospitalized with permanent injuries. Forced retirement at 36 after a shoulder injury that required surgery. But the timeline didn't match the money. Even successful fighters didn't make enough to buy resorts and fund major renovations. Mark dug deeper, finding business licenses, property records, LLC filings. Voss owned 6 properties in Iron Peak, 3 in nearby towns. Multiple business entities with vague purposes. Classic money laundering structure. What exactly did you hear in his office? Mark asked. Maria repeated the conversation, word for word. Her memory was precise, probably sharpened by fear. Cash logged as membership fees. Shipments mentioned. Someone with an accent, implying out-of-state or international connections. Mark made notes, building a profile. This wasn't just local corruption. This was organized crime, using a small town as a waypoint. The academy was perfect cover. Wealthy clients paying cash for training, equipment purchases in large amounts. Legitimate reason for people coming and going. Layer it properly, and dirty money became clean. I need to make a call, Mark said. Someone I trust. But first I need proof. You said you overheard this. Did you see anything? Documents, computers, anything physical? Maria hesitated. There's a ledger, old-fashioned, handwritten. I've seen it on his desk when I clean. Numbers, dates, names I don't recognize. You remember any of the names? She closed her eyes, thinking. Rostov, Chen, Morales. They repeat a lot. Mark typed them in, cross-referencing. His screen populated with results that made his jaw tighten. Rostov connected to Russian organized crime in Seattle. Chen linked to triads in San Francisco. Morales flagged multiple DEA investigations in Southern California. Voss wasn't just laundering money. He was a nexus point for multiple criminal organizations. This is bigger than I thought, Mark said quietly. What do we do? We get evidence, real evidence. Then we bring in people who can actually do something about it. Meanwhile, across town, Derek Voss sat in his office at the academy, a glass of scotch in hand, watching snow fall through floor-to-ceiling windows. The room reflected his success. Leather furniture, hardwood floors, framed photos of his fighting career covering one wall. Memorabilia from victories, some of which had ended careers. He'd built an empire through violence and intelligence, and he'd be damned if some cleaning woman destroyed it. His phone buzzed. Vic Rourke's name on the screen. Tell me it's done, Voss said. It's done. Found her car at her house. Signs of struggle inside. Tracked her into the woods. Blood trail led to a ravine. She fell, hit her head. We made sure she wouldn't be getting back up. Body? Left her where she fell, snow's covering everything. By the time anyone finds her, it'll look like she wandered off confused and died from exposure. Tragic accident. Voss sipped his scotch. The dog? Ran off wounded, probably dead in a ditch somewhere. And you're certain no one saw you? Positive. Place was isolated. No witnesses. Good. Make sure her house looks like she left in a hurry. Packed bags, that sort of thing. Create the narrative that she ran. Already done. Anything else? Monitor the situation. If her body turns up somewhere unexpected, we adapt. But keep it quiet. Or if anyone starts asking questions, I want to know immediately. Vic hesitated. There's something else. Been hearing about a new EU guy in town. Rented the Larson cabin up on Ridge Road. Keeps to himself, military bearing. Has a German shepherd. So? Lots of veterans around here. This one's different. Saw him at the diner. The way he moved, the way he assessed the room. That's not regular army. That's special operations. Voss's attention sharpened. Why do I care? Because he watched Maria leave, and his dog watched her too. Animals notice things. You think he's involved? I think he's a variable we didn't account for. Want me to check him out? Voss considered. Paranoia had kept him successful. Ignoring potential threats had buried better men than him. Find out who he is. Quietly. Don't approach him. Just get me information. Name, background, why he's here. If he's a problem, we'll handle it. If he's just passing through, we leave him alone. Understood. Voss ended the call and stared out at the snow. He'd worked too hard, taken too many risks, eliminated too many obstacles to let anything threaten what he'd built. Maria Santos had been a loose end. Loose ends got tied off or cut away. That was business. If this veteran became a problem, he'd be handled the same way. The next morning, Mark left Maria sleeping and took Titan into town. The dog needed the activity, and Mark needed information. They drove to the small medical clinic on Main Street, a modest building that served a population too small to justify a hospital. Inside, the waiting room was empty except for an older man reading a magazine and a receptionist behind glass. Mark approached, keeping his voice low. I need to speak with Dr. Chen. It's urgent. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, studied him. Do you have an appointment? No, but she'll want to hear what I have to say. Regarding? Maria Santos. The receptionist's expression shifted, concern replacing professional courtesy. Is Maria all right? She missed her last appointment. That's what I need to discuss with the doctor, privately. The woman hesitated, then picked up the phone. Quiet conversation Mark couldn't hear. She hung up, gestured to a door. She'll see you, exam room 3. Mark left Titan in the waiting room with a command to stay, then followed a hallway to a small exam room. He'd barely closed the door when it opened again and a woman entered. Dr. Sarah Chen was 32, with efficient movements and exhausted eyes that spoke of too many hours caring for too many patients with too few resources. She wore scrubs and a white coat, her black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She studied Mark with the same assessing gaze he'd given the diner. Two people trained to read others quickly. You mentioned Maria Santos, she said without preamble. Where is she? Is she hurt? She's alive, injured but stable. I'm treating her injuries, but she needs proper medical attention. The problem is the people who hurt her think she's dead, and I'd like to keep it that way for now. Dr. Chen's face hardened. The people who hurt her? You mean Derek Voss? Mark's attention sharpened. You know about Voss? I'm a doctor in a town of 3,000 people. I see the injuries. People talk. The broken bones from training accidents at his academy. The domestic violence victims too scared to name their abusers because they work for him or owe him money. The pattern of intimidation disguised as accidents. She crossed her arms. So yes, I know about Voss. What I don't know is who you are and why you're involved. My name is Marcus Donovan. I'm a Navy SEAL on medical leave. I found Maria in a ravine, nearly frozen to death. She told me what happened. What Voss is doing. I'm going to stop it. Dr. Chen laughed, bitter and tired. You and what army? Voss owns this town. The sheriff's in his pocket. The mayor takes campaign contributions from him. Half the businesses depend on academy customers. You can't fight that alone. Watch me. Something in his voice made her pause. She studied him more carefully, taking in the scars, the watchful eyes, the controlled stillness of someone who'd seen combat and survived. You're serious, completely. Then you need to know what you're facing. Come with me. She led him to her office, a cramped space filled with files and medical journals. She pulled a folder from a locked drawer, opened it to reveal photographs and medical records. 6 months of documentation, she said. Every suspicious injury, every pattern of abuse. I've been collecting evidence because someone needs to, and no one else will. But evidence means nothing if the system meant to act on it is corrupted. Mark studied the files. Fractures, contusions, lacerations, dates and names. A pattern of violence centered around one source. Why haven't you taken this to state police, federal authorities? Because Voss's lawyer is connected. Every time someone tries to investigate, jurisdiction questions arise. Witnesses disappear or recant. Evidence goes missing. He's insulated himself. She met his eyes. I've tried for 6 months to find someone who could help. Someone with authority and integrity. I haven't found that person yet. Maybe you don't need authority, Mark said quietly. Maybe you just need someone who won't stop. Dr. Chen's phone buzzed. She checked it, frowned. I have patience. But if you're serious about this, come back tonight. Bring Maria. I'll treat her injuries properly and tell you everything I know about Voss's operation. Mark nodded. As he turned to leave, Dr. Chen spoke again. Marcus Donovan. That name sounds familiar. Doubtful. I've never been here before. No, I mean from news reports. 2 years ago, a hostage situation in Somalia. A SEAL team extracted American missionaries from terrorists. The team leader was named Donovan. Mike's expression didn't change. Like I said, common name. But Dr. Chen smiled slightly. The report said he went into a compound alone to buy time for air support. Faced down 8 armed men with nothing but a sidearm and audacity. Saved 14 lives. If that were true, he'd be reckless and stupid. Or exactly the kind of person who could stand up to Derek Voss. Mark left without responding. But as he walked back to his truck where Titan waited, it felt something shift. He'd come to Iron Peak to hide from responsibility. To heal in isolation. To forget that he was a weapon pointed at problems normal people couldn't solve. But some problems didn't allow for neutrality. Some injustices demanded response. And Maria Santos, lying in his cabin with a broken arm and shattered sense of safety, deserved better than a world where power meant immunity. He'd give her that, even if it meant becoming the thing he'd been trying to escape. Mark returned to the cabin to find Maria awake and moving carefully around the small space, her broken arm in the makeshift sling he'd fashioned. Pepper lay near the stove, watching her with eyes that held more awareness than the previous day. Both survivors, both healing, both reminders of what happened when evil met no resistance. You shouldn't be up, Mark said, setting supplies on the table. I can't just lie there. I need to do something. She looked at him with determination that hadn't been broken by violence or cold. What happens now? Now we prepare. I spoke with Dr. Chen. She's been documenting Voss's operation for months. Tonight, we'll go see her. She'll treat your injuries properly, and we'll coordinate. You trust her? I trust that she's been trying to fight Voss when no one else would. That counts for something. Maria nodded, then moved to the window, staring out at the forest. My children still think I'm alive, right? They haven't been told anything? Not yet. Voss believes you're dead in that ravine. As far as anyone knows, you're missing. Your kids will be worried, but they're safe. We'll get word to them soon, I promise. The afternoon passed in tense preparation. Mark walked Maria through emergency procedures, what to do if someone approached the cabin while he was gone, where to hide, how to signal Titan. He demonstrated the shotgun he kept loaded near the door, made her practice racking it until the motion became automatic. I've never shot a gun, she protested. You point it at the threat and pull the trigger. That's all you need to know. The sound alone will make most people reconsider their choices. He positioned her near the window with the best sightline, showed her the two-way radio he'd leave with her, channel locked to the one in his truck. Anything happens, anything at all, you press this button and talk. I'll hear you. Titan will hear you. We'll come. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows through the pines, Titan's ears suddenly swiveled toward the driveway. The dog's body language shifted from relaxed to alert in an instant. Mark caught the change immediately, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. Inside, he told Maria quietly, "Back room, now." She moved without argument, understanding the tone. Mark killed the cabin lights, plunging the interior into darkness, broken only by firelight. He positioned himself at the window, Titan at his side, both watching the driveway. Minutes passed. Then headlights appeared through the trees, moving slowly up the access road. A truck, American make, modified with lift kit and off-road tires. It stopped 50 yards from the cabin, engine idling, high beams illuminating the clearing. Mark's jaw tightened. Someone was announcing their presence, making sure he knew they were there. Not a stealth approach, a message. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, hands visible and empty, though the bulk under his jacket suggested a concealed weapon. Even at this distance, Mark recognized the size and bearing. Vic Rourke, Voss's head of security. 2 more doors opened. The Lee brothers, Tanner and Brett, flanking Vic like trained dogs. all three armed, all three moving with the confidence of men who believed they owned the world they walked through. Those stopped 20 feet from the porch, positioned in the headlight beams where Mark could see them clearly. Vic spoke, his voice carrying through the cold air. Micus Donovan, Navy SEAL, 12-year service, recently medically discharged, renting this cabin from Carl Larson for 3 months, living alone, or so we thought. Mark remained silent, watching through the window, Titan's muscles coiled, ready to spring on command. Here's the thing, Vic continued. We're not here for trouble, just a conversation, man to man. You're new here, don't know how things work. We thought we'd explain, help you avoid making mistakes. Still, Mark said nothing. Let them talk. Information flowed from mouths left running. Tanner Lee shifted his weight, impatient. We know you were asking about Maria Santos at the clinic. Thing is, Maria's not your concern. She had problems, made bad choices, and now she's gone. Happens sometimes in winter. People wander off, get lost, freeze. Tragic, but natural. What we're wondering, Brett added, is why a guy on medical leave is getting involved in local business. You're here to rest, right? Recover. Mind your own business. Vic raised a hand, silencing the brothers. Mr. Voss appreciates veterans, respects your service. He owns half this town, employs 40 people. He's a pillar of the community. He'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings between you. Mark opened the cabin door. The movement was smooth, unhurried, but all three men tensed. He stepped onto the porch, Titan moving with him like a shadow. The dog's attention fixed on the visitors with predatory focus. You done? Mark's voice was quiet, conversational. Vic smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Just want to make sure we're clear. You stay out of our business, we stay out of yours. Everybody wins. I heard a different version, Mark said. I heard you and your friends attacked a woman half your size, kicked her dog, pushed her down a ravine, and left her to die, then came back to make sure she wouldn't survive. The smiles disappeared. Brett's hand moved toward his jacket. Mark's attention sharpened, but his body language remained relaxed. The contradiction would be confusing to people who hadn't trained to read violence. Careful what you accuse people of, Vic said, his voice hardening. That kind of talk could be considered slander. Truth isn't slander. You got proof of these claims? Witnesses? Evidence? Or just stories from May, a woman who's currently missing and probably dead. She's not dead. The words hung in cold air. Vic's expression shifted, surprise bleeding through professional control. What did you say? Maria Santos is alive, injured but recovering. And she's told me everything. About Voss, about the money laundering, about the criminal organizations he's working with. About you and your friends terrorizing anyone who gets in the way. Candra's hand was definitely moving toward his weapon now. Mark's voice cut through the motion like a blade. Before you do something irreversible, understand what you're facing. I'm a Navy SEAL with 12 years of combat experience across 4 continents. I've fought in mountains, deserts, jungles, and cities. I've extracted hostages from compounds with numerical superiority of 15 to 1. I've survived ambushes that killed better men than you. He took a step forward. Titan moved with him, a low growl building in the dog's chest. You're 3 men with illegal firearms and inflated egos. My dog alone could disable 2 of you before you cleared leather. I could drop all 3 before you got a shot off. But I'm giving you a choice. What choice? Vic's voice had lost its confidence. Walk away. Get in your truck. Drive back to Voss. Tell him his operation is over. Tell him federal authorities are already being contacted. Tell him every crime he's committed, every person he's hurt, every dollar he's laundered is about to become public record. If he's smart, he'll run. If he's stupid, he'll fight. Either way, he loses. Brett laughed, nervous and forced. You're insane. You think one person can take down Derek Voss? I don't think. I know. Voss has resources you can't imagine. Money, connections, people in positions of power. And I had something better. What's that? Mark's expression was carved from stone. Nothing left to lose. The standoff stretched, 3 armed men weighing their options against 1 man and a dog who'd survived worse. The mathematics weren't in their favor, and some instinct whispered that truth. Vic spoke carefully. You're making a mistake, a big one. The only mistake made tonight was you coming here, threatening me on my property. In Montana, that's called trespassing with hostile intent. Stand your ground laws apply. I'd be legally justified in defending myself with lethal force. Tanner's hand moved away from his jacket. The message was received. "Last chance," Mark said. "Leave now. Don't come back. Tell Voss what I said. What happens next is his choice." Vic studied him for a long moment. Professional evaluating professional. Whatever he saw made the decision for him. "We're leaving, but this isn't over." "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." The three men retreated to their truck, movements slower than their arrival, bravado deflated by reality. They climbed in, doors slamming. The engine roared, and they reversed down the driveway, faster than caution recommended. Mark watched until the taillights disappeared, then waited another 10 minutes, scanning the darkness for signs they'd left someone behind. Titan's body language gradually relaxed, indicating no remaining threats. Maria emerged from the back room, her face pale. "They know I'm alive. They'll tell Voss." "Good. Let them." The advantage of surprise is gone, but so is his assumption of safety. Now he knows he's being hunted. People make mistakes when they're afraid. "But my children, if Voss knows I survived, if he thinks I talked." Mark pulled out his phone. The satellite connection's slow, but functional. "We're out of time for caution. I need to make some calls." He dialed a number from memory. 3 rings, then a voice answered. "Female, professional. Agent Torres. Lisa, it's Mike Donovan." Pause. "Mark, where are you? Your command has been trying to reach you. Something about missing check-ins with your VA therapist." "I'm in Montana, and I need a favor. A big one." "What kind of favor?" "The kind that involves organized crime, money laundering, and multiple criminal organizations using a small town as a distribution hub. The kind that requires federal intervention because local law enforcement is compromised." Another pause. "You're supposed to be on medical leave, recovering, not investigating criminal conspiracies." "The conspiracy found me. I've got a witness with first-hand knowledge. Medical documentation of systematic violence. And I'm about to acquire physical evidence of financial crimes. But I need protection for the witness and her family. 2 college students. One at University of Montana, one at Montana Tech. Can you make that happen?" "Mark, I can't just deploy agents based on a phone call. I need something concrete. Justification for the resources." "You'll have it. Give me 24 hours. But those kids need protection now. Voss has already demonstrated willingness to threaten them. I won't let him follow through." He could hear Agent Torres thinking, weighing regulations against instinct. They'd worked together before. In situations where protocol clashed with necessity, she'd learned to trust his judgment. "I can have Denver field office send agents to monitor the students. Discreet observation, no contact unless there's an immediate threat. But Mark, if this turns out to be nothing." "It won't. I'll send you everything I have by tomorrow morning. Names, dates, connections to known criminals. Enough to justify a full investigation. 24 hours. After that, I need results or I pull my people back." "Understood. Thank you, Lisa." He ended the call and turned to Maria. "Your children will be protected. FBI agents will watch them starting tonight. Nobody will touch them." Relief flooded her face, followed immediately by fear. "But now Voss knows we're coming for him. Won't that make him more dangerous?" "Absolutely, which is why we're not waiting for him to make the next move." Mark checked his watch. 7:15. "Dr. Rudolph, Chen's expecting us at 8. We go there, get you treated, coordinate our next steps. Then I'm going to get the evidence we need to bury Voss." "How?" "By going to the source, the academy, tonight." "That's insane. It'll be full of his people. Armed security." "Security, you'll be walking into a trap." Mark smiled and there was nothing warm in it. "I've walked into worse. The difference is, this time they don't know what's coming. They think they're hunters. They're about to learn their prey." He gathered equipment, checking weapons and gear with practiced efficiency. Titan watched with alert attention, recognizing preparations for action. Maria stood helpless, her good hand clenched in frustration. "I should come with you. This is my fight. Your fight is staying alive and keeping your children safe. Let me do what I'm trained for." "Which is," Mark met her eyes, "bringing justice to people who thought they were untouchable." Dr. Chen's clinic was dark, except for a single light in the back office. Mark pulled his truck around to the rear entrance, keeping Maria low in the passenger seat, while Titan scanned the surroundings. The street was empty, snow muffling sound. The town quiet in that way small places become after dark, when honest people are home, and those with darker business prefer shadows. Sarah Chen opened the door before Mark knocked, gesturing them inside quickly. Her office was warm, cluttered with medical supplies and files that spoke of a practice stretched too thin. She locked the door behind them, pulled curtains over windows, and turned to Maria with professional assessment that became personal concern. "Maria, my God, I heard you were missing. Everyone's been talking." She guided the older woman to an examination table, her hands gentle but efficient. "Let me see that arm." While Dr. Chen worked, removing Mark's makeshift splint and examining the break with practiced touches, she spoke quietly. Vic Rourke and the Lee brothers were at the bar tonight, drinking heavily, agitated. Word is they ran into trouble at some cabin up on Ridge Road. They're saying there's a crazy veteran making threats. "Not threats," Mark said. "Promises." She glanced at him, then back to Maria's arm. "This needs proper casting. The break is clean, but it won't heal right without stabilization. I can do it here, but it'll hurt." "Do it," Maria said through gritted teeth. Dr. Chen worked efficiently, setting the bone, applying casting material with hands that had clearly done this hundreds of times. Maria's face went pale, sweat beading on her forehead, but she didn't cry out. Strength came in many forms. This woman had reserves most people never needed to access. While the cast set, Dr. Chen retrieved her folder of documentation. 6 months of evidence, patterns of abuse centered on Voss's academy. But there's more. 3 weeks ago, a shipment arrived at the academy. Large crates marked as training equipment. They were unloaded at 2 in the morning by people who weren't academy staff. "You saw this?" Mark asked. "I was treating a patient having a medical emergency, drove past the academy on my way home, saw the trucks, the activity. It struck me as odd, so I documented it." She pulled out photos taken from a phone, grainy but clear enough. 2 trucks, no company logos. 6 men, all armed. Crates taken directly into the basement level where Voss has his private offices. Mark studied the photos. Training equipment doesn't require armed guards at 2 in the morning. "Exactly. I think it was a shipment of something illegal. Drugs, weapons, I don't know. But whatever Voss is laundering money for, it's not just paperwork." Maria spoke up, her voice strained. "There's a ledger, in Voss's office. Handwritten entries, dates, amounts, names. I've seen it when I clean. It's kept in a safe behind a painting of his fighting career. The combination is his record, 28 wins. 4 losses, 2, 8, 4. Mark's attention sharpened. "You're certain?" "I've seen him open it. He doesn't know I was watching, but I was. Old women who clean are invisible. People forget we have eyes." Dr. Chen finished with Maria's arm, stepped back to admire her work. "That'll hold. Keep it dry, don't put weight on it. You'll need follow-up in 2 weeks, assuming we all survive that long." "We will," Mark said with certainty that made both women look at him. "Here's what's going to happen. Maria stays here tonight. Sarah, can you keep her safe? I live above the clinic. She can stay in my apartment. No one will think to look there." "Good. I'm going to the academy. I'll retrieve that ledger and any other evidence I can find. Sarah, I need you to compile everything you have into a digital format. Photos, medical records, timeline of incidents. Send it to this email address." He handed her a card with Agent Torres's information. "Federal authorities are already monitoring the situation. This will give them justification to move." "You're going alone?" Dr. Chen's voice carried disbelief. "The academy has security, cameras, guards. Voss himself lives on site. You'll never get in unseen. I've infiltrated harder targets with worse odds. This isn't Afghanistan or Iraq. You can't just shoot your way through American citizens." "I won't have to. I'm not going in loud. I'm going in invisible." Maria gripped his sleeve with her good hand. "If they catch you, they'll kill you." "They'll try. There's a difference." He knelt so they were eye level. "Maria, I made you a promise. Your children are safe. You're safe. Now I'm going to make sure you stay that way. Trust me." She searched his face, finding something there that eased her fear. "Be careful. Careful is how you survive." He stood, moved toward the door. "Titan stays with you. He'll protect you both if anyone comes." "You're leaving your dog?" Dr. Chen looked at Titan, who watched Mark with intense focus. "He's not my dog. He's my partner. And right now, you need protection more than I need backup." He gave Titan a command in hand signals. The dog's posture shifted, his attention transferring to Maria and Sarah. Guard mode. Nothing would reach them while Titan drew breath. Mark left through the back door, disappearing into darkness like smoke. Dr. Chen locked it behind him. Then turned to find Maria crying silently, tears tracking down weathered cheeks. He's going to die for me. A stranger. He's going to die. I don't think that man dies easily, Sarah said quietly. I think, Nick, he's exactly what Voss never expected. Someone who can't be bought, threatened, or stopped. Outside, Mark moved through Iron Peak streets like a ghost. Black tactical clothing, face obscured, moving through shadows between streetlights. The academy sat on the mountain's edge, 3 miles from town center, accessible by a winding road that serviced nothing else, isolated by design. He'd parked his truck 2 miles out, approached on foot for forest. Using terrain for concealment, the academy emerged from darkness gradually. A sprawling complex of modern architecture and glass, lit up like a resort, trying too hard to project legitimacy. The main building held training facilities, offices, guest accommodations. Behind it, connected by covered walkway, Voss's private residence, a fortress masquerading as a home. Mark counted 6 exterior cameras, 3 roving guards, motion sensor lights covering the parking area. Professional security, but overconfident. They were watching for threats they understood, not for someone trained to be invisible. He bypassed the cameras by staying in their blind spots, patience replacing speed. 30 minutes to cross 200 yards, moving only when guards' attention was elsewhere, freezing when eyes turned his direction. Cold seeped through his clothing, but discomfort was irrelevant. Mission parameters were simple. Get in, get evidence, get out. No contact is possible. The basement entrance Maria had mentioned was covered by a camera, but no guard. Mark waited until a patrol passed, then moved. 20 seconds to cross open ground, electronic lock requiring bypass. He'd come prepared. The device attached to the lock's reader cycled through codes, finding the match in 18 seconds. The door clicked open. Inside was darkness and concrete, storage level containing equipment and supplies. Mark pulled night vision monicality from his pack, the world transforming to green-tinted clarity. Rows of storage shelves, boxes of legitimate training gear, mixed with crates that looked newer, unmarked. He photographed serial numbers, markings, anything that could be traced. Then moved deeper, finding stairs leading up to the main level. This was the dangerous part. Upper levels meant people, witnesses, higher chance of detection. The stairwell door opened to a hallway. Plush carpet, expensive art, the aesthetic of wealth. Mark's footsteps were silent, years of training making movement instinctive. He passed training rooms, empty this late. Past guest accommodations, some occupied based on light under doors. Reached administrative wing. Voss's office was marked with a nameplate. Door locked, but Mart's pics made short work of it. Inside, the space screamed ego. Photos of fights won, opponents broken, championships claimed. A man who measured worth through dominance. Behind the largest photo, Maria had said. Mark lifted the frame away from the wall, revealing a wall safe. Digital lock, combination entry, 284. He entered the numbers. The safe opened. Inside, the ledger sat on top of stacks of cash and documents. Mark photographed everything, working quickly, aware that time was his enemy. Pages of handwritten entries, names Maria had mentioned, Rostov, Chen, Morales, dates, amounts, locations. A roadmap of criminal enterprise spanning years. He was photographing the last page when footsteps sounded in the hallway. Multiple people, voices raised. Mark closed the ledger, returned it to the safe, spun the lock closed. He repositioned the photo, moved toward the door. The handle turned before he reached it. Derek Voss entered his office, Vic Rourke behind him, both men in heated discussion that stopped the moment they saw Mark standing in the center of the room. Silence stretched. 3 men processing threat levels, calculating options, preparing for violence. Voss recovered first, his expression shifting from surprise to fury. You've got stones, I'll give you that. Breaking into my office, touching my property. His voice was conversational, but his body language screamed violence. This was a man who'd built his life on hurting people. Vic said you were dangerous. I didn't believe him. You should have, Mark said quietly. What were you looking for? Money? Information to sell? Justice, Voss laughed. Justice, that's rich. You know what justice is? It's a fantasy people tell themselves so they can sleep at night. Real world runs on power. I have it, you don't. Simple mathematics. Your mathematics are wrong. Vic moved to block the door, hand resting on his concealed weapon. "You're not leaving here, Donovan. Not alive. We'll dump your body in the mountains." Another veteran who couldn't handle civilian life wandered off, froze to death. Tragic, but common. "You'll try. There's 2 of us, 1 of you. I like those odds. Then you never faced someone who has nothing left to lose." Voss's smile faded. "You've got evidence, don't you? Photos, documents, something you think will bring me down? It won't. I have lawyers, connections, resources. Whatever you found dies with you." "Already sent. Federal authorities received everything 5 minutes ago. Automatically uploaded to cloud storage the moment I photographed it. Your operation is over, Voss. The only question is whether you run or fight." Voss's hand moved to a desk drawer. Mark's voice cut through the motion. "Guns in the drawer. You're thinking you can reach it before I reach you. You can't. I've closed distance on armed opponents in tighter quarters than this. Your hand will touch the grip. Mine will break your wrist, then your nose, then your knee. You'll be unconscious before Vic clears leather." Big words. "Try me." The standoff held. Then Vic's radio crackled. A voice, panicked. "Sir, we've got SDI vehicles approaching the gate. Multiple units. They're demanding entry." Voss's face went white. Mark smiled. "Told you. It's over." Vic drew his weapon. Mark moved. The sequence took 3 seconds. Mark closed distance, deflected Vic's gun arm upward. Delivered an elbow strike to the jaw that sent the bigger man crashing into the wall. Vic's gun clattered away. Voss lunged from behind his desk. Mark pivoted, caught the punch, redirected. Momentum and sent Voss stumbling into his own bookshelf. Books and trophies crashed down. Both men struggled to rise. Mark stood between them and the exit, completely relaxed, barely breathing hard. "Stay down. It's over." Voices shouted in the hallway. Doors opened. Federal agents in tactical gear flooded the building, weapons drawn, voices commanding compliance. Agent Torres entered the office, took in the scene, and shook her head. "Mark Donovan. Somehow I knew you'd be in the middle of this. Evidence is in the safe. Combination is 28-4. Ledger documenting years of money laundering. Connections to multiple criminal organizations." She gestured to her team. They secured Voss and Vic, reading rights while applying restraints. Voss glared at Mark with pure hatred. "You're a dead man. You hear me? Dead. I have people, resources. You'll never be safe." Mark leaned close, his voice barely audible. "I've been dead before. Died the day an IED killed my teammates. What you're looking at is what came back. And things that come back don't fear people like you." He walked past Voss, past the agents, into the hallway where more of Voss's associates were being arrested. The academy staff, the guards, the corrupt machine being dismantled piece by piece. Outside, snow had begun falling again, soft and clean, covering the ugliness underneath. Mark stood in it, letting cold air fill his lungs, feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Agent Torres joined him. "You know you're supposed to be on medical leave, not conducting solo operations against organized crime. Seems I'm bad at following doctor's orders." "Seems like. But Mark, this was good work, really good. You potentially saved lives tonight. 1 life would have been enough." She studied him. "The woman, Maria Santos, is she safe?" "She is now." "Good. We'll need her testimony. And yours. This is going to be a long investigation." "I'll be available." Agent Torres smiled. "Somehow I believe you. For what it's worth, you did the right thing." Mark watched agents escort Voss and Vic to waiting vehicles, lights flashing red and blue against white snow. The right thing. Maybe. Or maybe just the only thing he knew how to do. Protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Stand between evil and innocence. Be the weapon pointed at problems no one else would solve. It wasn't healing. It wasn't peace. But maybe it was purpose. And for now, that was enough. Dawn broke over Iron Peak with the kind of clarity that only comes after storms pass. Mark stood on Dr. Chen's back porch, coffee steaming in the cold air, watching the town wake to news that would reshape everything. FBI vehicles still lined the street near the academy. News vans had arrived from larger cities. Reporters hungry for the story of small-town corruption brought down by federal intervention. Inside, Maria sat at Sarah's kitchen table, her casted arm resting on a pillow, Pepper curled in her lap. The small dog had recovered remarkably, resilience bred into creatures who survived through loyalty and love. Titan lay at Maria's feet, his guard duty not yet relinquished despite the threat's elimination. Sarah entered with a tablet, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. It's everywhere. Local news, state news, even national outlets are picking it up. Derek Voss arrested on charges of money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy. Vic Rourke and the Lee brothers charged with assault, attempted murder, witness intimidation. The sheriff's been placed on administrative leave pending investigation into corruption charges. Maria's hands shook as she processed the information. It's really over. The immediate danger is, Mark said, stepping inside. Voss is in federal custody. His organization is being dismantled. But trials take time. You'll need to testify, probably multiple times. It won't be easy. I'll do whatever is necessary. Her voice carried strength that hadn't been there days ago. Survival did that. Showed people what they were capable of when pushed beyond breaking points. My children. Have they been told? Sarah nodded. FBI contacted them this morning. Explained you were safe, in protective custody during the investigation. They're flying home today. Should arrive this afternoon. Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks, relief so profound it manifested physically. Thank God. Thank God. They'll want to see you, Mark said gently. But there are procedures. FBI will want statements, medical documentation, coordination with prosecutors. It'll be a long day. I don't care. As long as they're safe, as long as this is over. Agent Torres arrived mid-morning, accompanied by 2 other federal agents and a victim advocate. The kitchen became a makeshift command center. Statements taken, evidence cataloged, the machinery of justice grinding forward with bureaucratic inevitability. Maria told her story from the beginning. The voices she'd overheard, the threats that escalated, the night she'd been left to die. Her voice shook, but never broke, each word another nail in Voss's coffin. Sarah provided medical records documenting not just Maria's injuries, but patterns spanning months. A chronicle of systematic violence disguised as accidents and misfortune. Mark gave his statements separately, clinical and precise, detailing his infiltration of the academy, the evidence he'd gathered, the confrontation that ended with arrests. Agent Torres listened with the attention of someone who understood the value of testimony from a trained observer. You took significant risks, she said when he finished. Legally and physically. Breaking into private property. Confronting armed suspects without backup. I could make arguments for charges against you. But you won't. She smiled slightly. No, I won't, because ultimately your actions led to the dismantling of a criminal organization that had operated with impunity for years. Sometimes justice requires people willing to step outside comfortable boundaries. I didn't do it for justice. Then why? Mark looked through the doorway to where Maria sat with her dog, exhaustion and relief warring on her weathered face. Because she needed help, and no one else was providing. Reading it. That's justice, Mark. Maybe the purest kind. By afternoon, the bureaucratic necessities were handled, and Maria's children arrived. Mark watched from a distance as they rushed into Sarah's clinic. A young woman and young man in their early 20s, faces marked by fear and relief and confusion. They embraced their mother carefully, mindful of her injuries, voices overlapping in questions and reassurances. Maria held them with her good arm, crying openly now. Whispering in Spanish words Mark didn't need to translate. Love transcended language. These were her reasons for surviving, for enduring, for fighting when fighting seemed impossible. He turned to leave, unwilling to intrude on the reunion, but Maria called out, "Marcus, wait." He stopped. She disentangled herself from her children, crossed the room with surprising speed, and hugged him fiercely, despite the cast and the pain. You saved my life. You saved my children. I don't have words for what that means. You don't need words. How do I thank you? You rebuild. You heal. You show your kids that evil doesn't always win. That's thanks enough. She pulled back, studying his face with the intensity of someone trying to memorize features. What will you do now? My leave is almost over. I'll return to base, finish my evaluation, see what comes next. Will you stay in the military? Mark didn't answer immediately. The question had haunted him for months. Its discharge papers listed medical leave, but everyone understood what that meant. PTSD, survivor's guilt, injuries both visible and invisible. The question wasn't whether he could return to service, but whether he should. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants peace, quiet, distance from violence. And the other part knows that peace is a luxury people like Maria can't afford unless someone stands between them and those who would take it. She squeezed his hand. Whatever you decide, know that you made a difference here. You gave me my life back, my children's futures back. That matters. He nodded, unable to articulate the tightness in his chest. For months, he'd questioned his purpose, his value, whether the violence he'd committed in service had meaning. Maria's words didn't erase those doubts, but they quieted them. Sometimes one life saved justified 1,000 struggles. Sarah approached as Maria returned to her children. You're leaving? Soon. I'll stay until the preliminary hearings. Make sure nothing threatens Maria. But after that, I need to go. Back to your cabin? For a while, then wherever the Navy decides I'm needed. She handed him a business card. If you're ever back this way, look me up. Iron Peak could use a decent human being in permanent residence. I'm not sure decent is the word people would use. Then they don't know you like I do. What you did, the risks you took, the way you protected someone you didn't know, that's the definition of decent. Mark pocketed the card without commitment, but something in Sarah's expression suggested she understood he was a man built for movement, not settling. His nature was intervention, not integration. The following days passed in compressed time. Preliminary hearings where Voss and his associates were denied bail, deemed flight risks with resources to disappear. Evidence presented that painted pictures of operations spanning years, connections to criminal networks across 3 states. The scope of corruption went deeper than anyone had imagined. Sheriff Tom Brennan resigned rather than face formal charges, his career ending not in glory, but shame. The mayor announced he wouldn't seek re-election. The town council launched investigations into financial dealings with Voss's enterprises. Iron Peak was purging its rot, painful but necessary. Maria returned to her home, her children taking leave from college to stay with her while she recovered. The house had been vandalized during the attack, but neighbors materialized to help repair damage. Paint, carpentry, donated furniture. The community that had cowered under Voss's shadow found courage in his absence. Mark watched from distance, staying at his cabin, maintaining space between himself and gratitude he didn't know how to process. Titan seemed to understand, the dog content with their isolation, though he remained more alert than before, as if understanding threats sometimes came from unexpected directions. On the 7th day, Agent Torres called. Thought you'd want to know. Voss is cooperating. Giving up names, locations, operations, trying to reduce his sentence. What we're uncovering is going to lead to arrests in 5 states. You opened a door to something bigger than anyone realized. Good. There's more. The military's been asking about you. Your command wants to know if you're fit to return to active duty. I told them what I witnessed, your tactical thinking, your ability to operate under pressure, your commitment to mission objectives. I recommended full reinstatement. Mark's chest tightened. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Men like you are rare, Mark, capable of violence, but governed by conscience. The world needs that, especially now. He didn't respond, unable to articulate the conflict. Part of him craved return to purpose, to the clarity of military service, where objectives were defined and success measurable. Another part remembered the cost, the teammates who hadn't made it home. The weight of responsibility for lives depending on his decisions. Think about it, Agent Torres said. Whatever you decide, know that you made a difference here. That counts for something. After she disconnected, Mark sat on his porch watching snow fall through pine trees. Titan lay beside him, solid and constant, the one relationship in his life uncomplicated by doubt or expectation. The dog didn't care about his past or future. Only present mattered. Only loyalty and purpose found in moment-to-moment existence. Maybe that was the lesson. Stop trying to reconcile who he'd been with who he might become. Accept that he was a weapon. But weapons weren't inherently evil. Their morality came from the hands that wielded them, the causes they served, the innocence they protected. He'd come to Iron Peak seeking escape from responsibility. Instead, he'd found reminder of why responsibility mattered. Maria and her children were alive because he'd acted when action was needed. That simple truth held weight philosophy couldn't dismiss. His phone rang again. Different number, familiar name. Commander Harrison, his CO. Donovan, time to come home. Your leave is over. Medical evaluation scheduled for next week. We need to determine if you're fit for duty. Understood, sir. I've read the reports from Montana. What you did there, taking down that criminal operation, that's the kind of initiative we value. The kind that makes a SEAL. It was just what needed doing, sir. That's exactly my point. You see what needs doing and you do it. Without hesitation, without concern for personal cost. That's who you are, Lieutenant. Question is, are you ready to be that person in uniform again? Mark looked at Titan, at the forest that had been a sanctuary, at the town visible in the valley below where people were rebuilding lives because he'd refused to look away. Yes, sir, I'm ready. Good. Report to base by Friday. We'll get you sorted out. Welcome back, Donovan. The call ended. Mark sat in silence, processing the decision he'd made instinctively, without deliberation. His path forward was clear, not because doubt had vanished, but because purpose outweighed uncertainty. He was a protector, a weapon pointed at evil, a man built for standing between innocence and violence. Trying to be anything else was denial of fundamental nature. On his final morning in Iron Peak, Mark drove into town one last time. He stopped at Maria's house, finding her in the garden with her children, planting flowers despite the cold. An act of faith that spring would come and life would continue. She saw him, smiled, and approached. You're leaving. Orders came. Time to go back. Will we see you again? Maybe, someday. But Maria, you don't need me anymore. You're stronger than you know. You survived hell. You'll survive whatever comes next. She hugged him again, briefer this time, understanding his discomfort with prolonged emotion. Thank you, for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For caring when you didn't have to. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. I will. And Marcus, whatever happens, wherever you go, know that you're a good man. Don't let anyone tell you different. He nodded, unable to trust his voice, and returned to his truck where Titan waited. They drove through town one last time, past the clinic where Sarah waved from a window, past the diner where Claire had first seen him and marked him as military, past the academy, now dark and empty, awaiting auction and new purpose. Iron Peak receded in his mirrors, a chapter closing, but the weight it left wasn't burden, it was reminder. That isolation wasn't healing. That running from purpose only delayed inevitable confrontation with self. That being a weapon wasn't curse if wielded in service of justice. He drove toward base, toward evaluation, toward uncertain future. But uncertainty no longer terrified him. He'd faced worse, survived worse, and found in survival not just existence, but meaning. Beside him, Titan watched the road with alert attention. Partner and friend, constant through chaos. Together they'd face whatever came next, because that's what survivors did. They moved forward, they protected, they stood when others couldn't, and sometimes that was enough. 3 months later, spring arrived in ways that transformed landscapes from monochrome to technicolor. Snow melted into streams that fed rivers, revealing earth that had slept under white blankets through winter's harshness. Trees budded with green so vivid it hurt to look at after months of gray and white. The world remembered how to live again. March stood in the courtyard of Naval Base Coronado, California, watching new recruits run through exercises that had once defined his existence. The evaluation process had taken weeks. Psychological assessments, physical tests, reviews of his service record and the Montana incident, conversations with therapists who asked pointed questions about trauma and coping mechanisms and whether he was truly ready to return to combat operations. In the end, the decision had been unanimous. Lieutenant Marcus Donovan was fit for active duty. The nightmares hadn't disappeared, but he'd learned to function through them. The survivor's guilt remained, but it no longer paralyzed him. He'd found something in Montana that therapy couldn't provide. Proof that his skills had purpose beyond destruction, that protection mattered as much as elimination. Titan lay in the shade nearby, watching Mark with patient attention. The dog had been cleared for continued service as well, his injuries healed, his focus sharp. They'd been reassigned to training duty temporarily, teaching the next generation of SEALs and their canine partners the skills that kept them alive in places where mistakes meant body bags. It wasn't frontline deployment, but Mark found satisfaction in it, passing knowledge forward, ensuring others survived the situations that had claimed his teammates. There was honor in that, purpose that didn't require him to carry a rifle into hostile territory, though he would if ordered. His phone buzzed, a text from an unfamiliar number, but the message was clear. Thought you'd want to see this. Below it, a photo. Maria stood in front of a small storefront. A sign above the door reading Santos Family Restaurant. She was smiling, genuinely smiling, her arm out of its cast, holding a ribbon while her children stood beside her with scissors, preparing for a grand opening. The caption read, "New beginnings. Thank you for making this possible." Mark studied the photo, something tight in his chest loosening. She'd rebuilt, not just survived, but thrived. Used the settlement money from lawsuits against Voss's estate to create something lasting. A legacy for her children, proof that goodness could emerge from trauma. He typed a response, "Proud of you, keep fighting." Her reply came quickly, "Always, because someone taught me that's what survivors do." Another message arrived, this one from Dr. Sarah Chen. Iron Peak is healing, slowly, but healing. New sheriff, new mayor, new beginning. Your cabin is still available if you ever want to visit. We remember what you did. We won't forget. Mark pocketed his phone without responding. Memory was complicated. Part of him wanted to forget Iron Peak, file it away with other operations, and move forward. Another part understood that some experiences carved themselves too deep for forgetting. They became part of foundation, shaping who you were whether you acknowledged them or not. Commander Harrison approached across the courtyard, his bearing commanding respect earned through decades of service. At 56, he was a legend in SEAL community, a man who'd operated in every major conflict since Desert Storm, and somehow survived when statistics said he shouldn't have. "Donovan, walk with me." They moved toward the base perimeter, Titan following at Mark's heel. Harrison didn't speak immediately, letting silence stretch in that way commanders did when they were organizing thoughts into words that mattered. "I've been reviewing your performance over the past 3 months," Harrison finally said. "Your instruction scores are excellent. Recruits respond to you. Your tactical knowledge is being transferred effectively. But I can't shake the feeling you're restless." "I'm doing the job I was assigned, sir." "That's not what I asked. I asked if you're restless. If teaching feels like holding pattern instead of purpose." Mark considered lying, offering the response expected of good soldiers. But Harrison had earned honesty through years of leading men into situations where trust meant survival. "Sometimes," Mark admitted, "training is important, but it's not the same as application. I'm teaching people to be ready for situations I'm no longer facing." "Would you go back? If I offered you deployment, would you take it?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications. Deployment meant returning to combat zones, to the chaos and violence and constant threat that had broken him once. It meant risking the fragile stability he'd rebuilt over 3 months of therapy and training, and learning to sleep without waking in cold sweats. But it also meant purpose. Mission. The clarity of objectives, where success was measurable, and failure had consequences that mattered. "If that's where I'm needed, I'd go." Harrison nodded, unsurprised. "That's what I thought. Which is why I'm offering you something different. We're creating a specialized unit, small team, domestic operations, situations that fall between local law enforcement capabilities and federal authority. Places where corruption or organized crime has compromised normal response channels. Situations like Montana." Mark's attention sharpened. "Vigilante work?" "Legal work. Sanctioned by appropriate authorities, coordinated with federal agencies, operating within constitutional bounds. But yes, situations where traditional channels have failed and people need someone willing to step into gray areas." Harrison stopped, faced Mark directly. "You've got skills most operators don't. Not just tactical, but moral clarity. You see injustice and you can't ignore it. That's rare. I want to build a team around that capability. This is officially sanctioned. Through channels I'm not at liberty to discuss in detail. But yes, official, legal, with proper oversight and authorization. We're not creating cowboys. We're creating a scalpel for problems that require precision. Mark thought of Maria, of the way corruption had flourished in Iron Peak because good people lacked means to fight back, of how one person willing to act had dismantled years of criminal enterprise, of the potential if that capability was replicated, refined, deployed strategically. I'm interested. Good. We start building the team next month. I want you as second in command. Helping select personnel, developing protocols, identifying initial targets. It's groundbreaking work, Donovan. The kind that could change how we approach domestic threats. And if it goes wrong? If operations turn controversial? Harrison smiled grimly. Then we'll face consequences together. But I've been in this business 35 years. I've learned that sometimes preventing tragedy requires accepting risk. I'd rather try and fail than never try at all. They walked back toward the training grounds, the conversation apparently concluded. But Mark's mind raced with possibilities. A sanctioned way to do what he'd done in Montana. To stand between innocent people and those who preyed on them. To use skills honed in combat for protection rather than elimination. It wasn't peace. It would never be peace. But maybe peace wasn't what he needed. Maybe purpose was enough. That evening, Mark sat in his quarters with Titan, reviewing files on potential team members. Operators from various special forces branches, each with skills and experience that made them candidates. He was looking for specific qualities. Technical competence, obviously, but also something harder to quantify. Moral compass, ability to see beyond orders to the people those orders affected. A woman came into the restaurant yesterday. She was scared, Marcus. I recognized that fear. The way she jumped when doors opened. How she kept checking over her shoulder. I talked to her, got her story. Her husband works for a construction company. She witnessed something illegal, and now they're threatening her family if she reports it. Mark's jaw tightened. Did you tell her to go to authorities? She tried. Local police told her there wasn't enough evidence. Federal agencies said it wasn't their jurisdiction. She's trapped between doing the right thing and protecting her children. Just like I was. Maria, I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm asking if you know someone who can help. Someone who understands what it's like when systems fail and people suffer because of it. Mark was quiet, processing. This was exactly the kind of situation Harrison had described. Exactly the problem his new unit was being designed to address. Give me her contact information. I'll make sure it gets to people who can actually do something. Relief flooded Maria's voice. Thank you. I knew you'd help. I told her about you, about what you did for me. She cried, Marcus. Just knowing someone might care enough to help, it gave her hope. After disconnecting, Mark stared at the contact information Maria had sent. A woman named Jennifer Patterson in Denver, Colorado. A construction company called Rocky's Development Group. Allegations of contractor fraud and witness intimidation. It could be nothing, could be misunderstanding or exaggeration, or it could be another Iron Peak. Another situation where corruption flourished because good people lacked means to fight back. He forwarded the information to Harrison with a simple note, potential first assignment. The response came within minutes, investigating, good instincts. Mark stood, moved to the window overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Waves crashed against shore in eternal rhythm, powerful and constant, reshaping coastline through patient persistence. Maybe that's what justice required. Not dramatic intervention, but consistent pressure, refusing to let evil operate unchallenged, standing up when others couldn't. Titan joined him at the window, the dog's presence grounding and familiar. They'd been through hell together, survived when survival seemed impossible, found purpose in protection when everything else felt meaningless. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Because that's what partners did, what warriors did, what survivors did. They moved forward, they protected, they stood. Mark's reflection in the window showed a man changed by experience, but not broken by it. The scars remained, physical and psychological, but they'd become part of foundation rather than weight dragging him down. He was a weapon, but weapons weren't evil. Their morality came from purpose, from the causes they served, from the innocence they shielded. He fought about Maria rebuilding her life, about Sarah Chen continuing to fight for her patients, about the town of Iron Peak slowly healing from years of corruption. He fought about Jennifer Patterson in Denver, afraid and alone, waiting for someone to care enough to help. The world was full of people suffering injustice. He couldn't save them all, but he could save some. And maybe that was enough. Maybe one life at a time, one situation at a time, one fight at a time, he could make a difference. It wasn't the peace he'd sought when he came to Montana. It was something better, something sustainable, purpose that aligned with capability, a way forward that honored his nature instead of fighting it. Titan looked up at him with patient attention, waiting for command or decision, or simply companionship. Mark rested his hand on the dog's head, feeling warmth and loyalty, and the unbreakable bond forged through shared survival. Ready for the next mission, boy? Titan's tail wagged once. Affirmative. Always ready, always loyal, always willing to stand beside his partner against whatever darkness waited. Mark smiled, the expression feeling strange on features that had forgotten how, but genuine, real. Because for the first time in months, he wasn't running from his past. He was using it, building on it, becoming the person his experiences had shaped him to be. A protector, a warrior, a man who stood between evil and innocence because someone had to and he was willing. The most important battles weren't fought in distant lands against foreign enemies. They were fought at home, in small towns and quiet neighborhoods, against corruption that flourished in shadows. Fighting those battles required different tactics, but the same commitment, the same willingness to risk everything for people who couldn't risk anything. Somewhere out there, another Maria was waiting. Another community was suffering under oppression it couldn't fight alone. Another innocent person needed someone willing to stand. And when that call came, when duty demanded response, Marcus Donovan would answer. Because being a warrior wasn't about seeking violence. It was about standing ready when peace required protection. It was about using strength in service of those who had none. It was about refusing to look away when looking away was easier. That was justice. Not perfect, not clean, but real. The kind that changed lives one intervention at a time. Mark turned from the window, pulled up his laptop, and began preparing. Research on Rocky's development group, background checks on key personnel, maps of Denver, building the foundation for potential operation. Because survivors didn't just endure. They fought, they protected, they stood. And sometimes, all it took was one person willing to act. One person who understood that evil flourished when good people did nothing. One person built for standing between darkness and light. Marcus Donovan was that person. And his war wasn't over. It was just beginning. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that one person can make a difference, please subscribe to this channel. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Mark's position? Would you have walked away, or would you have stood and fought? Share this story with someone who needs to remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear. It's protecting the vulnerable even when protection comes at personal cost. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for a hero. Someone is praying for intervention. Someone needs to know that good people still exist, still fight, still stand against injustice. And when that call comes, when duty demands response, heroes answer. May you have the courage to stand when standing is needed. May you have the strength to protect when protection is required. May you never lose faith that one person, one act, one moment of courage can change everything. God bless you all. Until the next story, because somewhere in the darkness, a light is waiting to be lit, and that light is you.